Steve, the survey, I think on one of the charts, 34 or something, said that 43% of the manufacturers have a succession plan, which was down, actually. And you talked also about some other elements of it, and the succession plan is all about people in many ways. Did that surprise you that it went down? Is it affected by the COVID, or what are your thoughts as a person who works with a lot of manufacturers around succession planning as part of their strategic plan?
Thanks for asking that question, Bob. This is an area that I've got some particular interest and passion in, especially with recent credential agreeing in exit planning. Here's an interesting thought, is that business owners, private business owners, especially small business owners, the majority of their wealth, their personal wealth, is tied up in the business, 75%-ish. And some who have planned well, they're ahead of the curve. But that means that at some point when they're trying to exit the business, they have to successfully make that transition, successfully succeed out, if you will, and have somebody succeed in behind them in order to harvest that wealth from the business. And it's not something that we can do overnight. I'm frankly, when I saw that data set, and Rob was reviewing with us today, and in fact, hearing the extra details about how smaller businesses, even a smaller percentage, have that succession plan versus larger businesses, it makes me scared. It makes me scared on behalf of our manufacturing clients. Because I think, much like Abbey, when I think succession planning, I think broadly about all positions and all levels. But I think in that particular question, I think our clients, our manufacturers, when they are answering that, they're thinking about ownership transition. They're thinking about that top business leader transition. And if only 4 out of 10 of our business leaders have a plan, that means 6 out of 10 don't. It's not something that you can successfully accomplish overnight or in a couple of months or very quickly. It takes very deliberate, planned action to do it successfully in a win-win perspective, both for the exiting owner or leader and whoever's coming in behind.
We often talk about training of our people. We love to talk about internally in our organization as skills development. How do you apply it to your job so that your company gets better? Abbey, maybe you could share some, let's say, recruitment and retention strategy examples that have really worked, because I think there's a lot of manufacturers that kind of feel like, well, that's not someone I control. There's just too much competition for my people right now. How can they differentiate in what I would call the onboarding process, maybe?
Great question, Bob. So I think one of the best ways to kind of give that example is just through telling a story of one of my clients. So I have a client who was struggling to hire and retain forklift drivers. And they weren't actually having a hard time attracting them, but they were having a hard time retaining them. So probably hired, let's just say 20, and we kept maybe 6. So we were concerned about that. And so we talked a little bit about, what's going on, why, what's the gap, what's happening. And what we really found out was they actually didn't need to hire a forklift driver. They needed to hire really good decision makers and then teach them how to be a forklift driver. And so what it really came down to is that the actual job itself was about the decision making that was happening by those material handlers on a regular basis. And then they were in a pretty complex environment. And what they were doing is they're hiring forklift drivers. And that's what they were, that's the competencies that they were basing it on. And so we flipped their hiring process, and they hired for decision makers first, and then we trained forklift drivers. Because, well, we can argue this, but I would say training a forklift driver technical skills is easier than developing that decision-making skill. It takes longer. And so we found by hiring for the decision-making skill, we were able to then train to the forklift skill, and we had a higher level of success. So one of the things that I really encourage our clients to start to think about is if you're having gaps, let's go back and really think about why. And really dig into what are the competencies that we're really hiring for, what are the competencies that we really need, and then what can we train? So that way we can get a better fit. And it's hard to find people right now, and so it's not great to have a high turnover rate in those first few weeks. And so we want to really figure out what the right fit is in terms of competencies. In addition to that, I'm seeing a lot of changing and thought process around what Bob had just indicated, that onboarding process. And one of the things that I'm seeing clients do is that they're taking a little bit more time to really be sure that employees know what the work environment's going to be like, what the work is. They're taking time to ensure that they're being connected to their leaders and to individuals within your organization, so they have that connection immediately. And they're altering and just formalizing that in onboarding process more than they ever have before. And really, that creates the foundation, because when we look at attraction and we look at retention in organizations, it all comes down to employee engagement. And the base level of employee engagement, the foundation of employee engagement, is basic needs. I know what's expected of me at work. And the more we can provide that to our new team members in their early days of employment with us, the higher the likelihood is that we're going to keep them. And also, the better we do about communicating what it means to work for us up front, the more likely we are going to have a good fit, and again, the more likely we can keep them. And so I'm really seeing a lot of movement in clients around that initial work. We call it the talent life cycle, right? So that immediate work in that talent life cycle, to really be sure that we're setting employees and team members up for success, so they know what's expected, and then we can build off of the engagement from there.
So I said earlier we're going to get back to business disruption, because that's where I started from. And supply chain was a huge disruption to top of the chart. So, Greg, I think you've done a lot of ISO, as has Keith, so maybe both of you have an answer around this. How could ISO potentially, or what can you do to try to do better supplier management? Because that is part of supply chain issues, along with maybe price increases, et cetera. But isn't a good succession plan, isn't a good strategy, and isn't good ISO really trying to reach into your suppliers as much as to your customers?
So I will kind of split that up and handle one more from an operations point of view that ties into ISO, and I'll let Keith kind of handle the supplier management side, if that's okay, Keith?
Very good.
So usually going to companies right now, it's interesting because you can tell who are your buyers. They're the ones with the frazzled hair, and it's really, they're not sure which ends up, because they just have really no life right now trying to keep their supply chain issues under control now. And so when we think about that, and we think about supply chain issues, there's been two trends I've been seeing with companies. And it's really interesting, because when we go into companies right now, it's really hard to see the impact of workforce shortage and supply chain, and try to get what the baseline is, what's normal for this organization there, because that kind of creates a cloud bank of really seeing what's going on within the organization now. And on one side, what I've learned with talking to employees and with leaders within the organization is a lot of the issues they had were pre-COVID. So they existed before, but what COVID has done, if you will, is kind of lowered the water level a little bit. So these rocks existed before. Now there's hardly any room for navigation there. So that's kind of the one thing I've kind of learned from talking to clients. The other thing I learned is really something that excites me, and this is there's a lot of innovation and creativity going on in problem solving right now. So they're seeing problems out there with their supply chain, and leaders are coming up with ideas, or employees are coming up with ideas that 6 months ago, 9 months ago, nobody would have ever thought of. So if you think about the first little story about problems that existed before, and then this innovation and creativity, the bottom line is kind of this idea of how do we get to problem solving? And so how does that tie into ISO 9000 standard? Is we're always about continual improvement. And that's easy for me because I'm passionate about continuous improvement there. And so when we think about those rocks that exist there, we can wait and kind of push them off, or within the ISO world, or within any world of really a management system, we can get to daily management and try to get that employee thinking about those issues, and take those rocks down to pebbles and go after them that way. So that's more of an operations perspective that ties into kind of the principles of ISO. I'll kind of hand it off to Steve. You can talk about supplier management and think about, Keith.
Keith, that's Steve. Yeah.
You looked at Steve, I know. That's all right, it happens all the time. Supplier management is one of those controls. The little history lesson, ISO 9001, was developed as a supplier management tool. It was intended to be handed down to help tell your supplier communication, what you expect from them. What do I need to see from you? What's our relationship going to be like? Initially, it was a push down telling me I need these to look like this, good parts that resemble these. It's moved into, this is what I expect of you. This is what I expect from your culture and our engagement, our relationship. What are we going to be partners together on this relationship? How are we going to interact and be together? How do we improve together? What do we need to talk about? What's bothering us? It's not simply about sending a purchase order and receiving ingredients. It's about a relationship, partnering and building up on those things. With the need to onshore, who are you picking as your replacement suppliers? What qualities do they have? Maybe they need to have a management system so you can be confident that they're going to deliver to your expectations. The other part about choosing how to work with your suppliers is when you're saying yes. And part of every management system is before saying yes to your customer, you need to know what your employees, your business, and your management team can deliver before saying yes. So we need to draw those parts of that frame together and say yes to our customer when we can deliver on those things. It's not a no, but it's we can in this relationship and communicate those. The same happens downstream with your supplier, bringing them together. So supplier engagement is going to feel a lot like employee engagement. How does it bring it together, and what do we expect to grow and have a culture of successes?
So Keith, you work with a lot of clients, and I still get to understand management review, regular cadence. Still not quite clear on how the communication gets, and so the question's either for Abby, communication gets to the people to make sure they understand why we've embraced this system and why it's bringing a benefit to me. Is that daily? Is it some additional skills development you have to go through? Abby's nodding, so you're off the hook.
Okay, we'll let her go.
I'll take it for you. So great question, Bob. So that's about the I'm going to use the P word, all right? So you're going to be proud of me because I'm going to use the process word. Communication process is a core to being able to run your business, and your management system creates the venue for that process. So what I think about is how do we drive that down and think overall, right? So leaders of organizations, you're sitting in this room with me, right? How many of you have ever had a time where what you want was not what you got? Yeah, you're awake, you're listening. I got hands in the back. Look at that. All right, so that's what I want you to think about, is that your communication process increases the likelihood that what you want is what you're going to get. And so we have to think about what happens in between, and it's all about your business, your leaders' communication, and leaders' behaviors. And the management system structure actually creates the venue for communication. It starts with daily management. So your leads on the floor at that kind of that lowest level, right? They're having daily communication, and we call these daily huddles, right? Having that daily communication is the foundation of that. Then, just like he said, that drives the weekly huddle. So then the leadership team comes out to your production floor, and they're supporting those area leaders, right? And in doing that, what they're doing is that they're ensuring that the communication that's happening at the floor level is absolutely what they want. And so they're helping that area leader understand the connection to the overarching organization, and on a weekly basis, they're ensuring that that messaging, that communication process is solid and strong, and then it tiers up from there. And so when you think about that communication process, your management system is the structure that kind of keeps it going, and then the actions and the behaviors by the leaders at all levels pushes down and ensures that all levels of employees understand the connection to your strategy, mission, vision, values, understand your why. And really the goal is to be able to communicate that why daily to your employees through those daily huddles and daily management.
I'll just add one more thought to this connection of communication here, and think back to when COVID first started, March 2020 or whatever it was, when it really impacted your facility. And a lot of organizations really pulled together and increased communication. And I think the employees felt that in a very positive way. because there was a lot of uncertainty going on. And you just have to ask yourself, has that gone away? Because I come from a thought process that everybody shows up every day to do the best they can. And so what's getting in their way? And so as a leadership team, as a communication process, it's so critical from my perspective to drive down what's important and what is important every day. And having that communication process going was really vital during COVID. But I think it still is just as valid today with supply chain issues ongoing and workforce shortages. So that'd be my connection to what has been said before.
It's a great connection, and I think it's sometimes you think of strategic planning and your continuous improvement effort, your ISO, your talent, it's all kind of silos. And I think this discussion really pointed out how integrated it has to be to really drive a business to new growth.